Welcome to the Ticket Podcast. The Ticket Podcast is a motivational and educational podcast created to inspire people to chase their dreams and achieve their goals. We sell tickets to health, wealth, and happiness. The only question left to ask is, what's your ticket going to be? This episode of the Ticket Podcast is brought to you by the Sports Business and Leadership Association. Members of the SBLA believe that charity is a contact sport. The SBLA is a 501c3 nonprofit that provides underprivileged children unique sports experiences. You can visit the SBLA website at www.nationalsbla.com and visit the gift shop to wear your support. Today's ticket is with Megha Parekh. Megha is a senior VP and the chief legal officer of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Megha is a magna cum laude graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School. Megha was named to the Forbes magazine's 30 Under 30 list in 2012 and the Sports Business Journal's 40 Under 40 list in 2018. Megha is a director of the Sports Business and Leadership Association.
All right, welcome to the Ticket Podcast. We have Megha Parekh on this episode. Megha is the Senior VP, Chief Legal Officer for the Jacksonville Jaguars. She's on the board of directors of the Sports Business and Leadership Association. And Megha, I think if I'm correct, from my knowledge, you are the highest ranking female executive in the NFL. Is that correct, or am I wrong about that?
I don't know if that's true, because I know there's other awesome women that are in my role at other NFL teams, but certainly one of the highest here, and I'm in a very awesome group.
Yeah, very, very cool. Well, it seems to me like with most people in the legal department, some teams have a split between legal and everything else, and some don't. And at least from me reading your bio and knowing you a little bit, it seems like you are involved in a lot, which is very, very cool because that puts you in the operations side and even having an impact on the field too. So, so it's very, very cool. Well, welcome to be here. The Ticket Podcast, as you know, is about motivation, about leadership, about sports. And mainly the goal is to tell the story of the people we interview of what was their ticket to become who they are and how does sports play a role in that. So right out the gate, as someone who went to Harvard undergrad, Harvard Law School, why sports?
So first of all, David, thanks so much for having me on here. What is very funny about the first question is that, as you might be able to guess from what you know about me, is that I'm actually a wildly unathletic, huge nerd. So I'm terrible at playing sports, even though
I heard you're trying to surf.
I love
if that's true, you're better than me.
I guess it all depends on what the bar is. But I've loved sports ever since the time that I was a little kid. My big brother was then and is still one of my heroes. And so because of that, I always wanted to do what he was doing. And that meant everything from watching football and baseball to professional wrestling, which all has ended up being helpful. But I would say that there's two ways in which, in particular, I've learned from sports. So despite being wildly unathletic, I would say that actually as I've gotten older, things that you sort of take for granted when you're younger, which is your health and your fitness, that's become a lot more important to me. And so what I've learned from my own sort of development just as an athlete, and I'm using that term loosely, is that it takes a lot of discipline to exercise. And while natural talent's obviously important, especially in sports, hard work can make up for it. So I am wildly unathletic, but I've tried to make it a priority, especially over the last 2 years or so, to make sure that I don't sacrifice exercise, in particular when work is getting busy, because that's usually one of the first things that goes. And David, I know you have a busy life and kids, so you, I'm sure, understand that even better than I do. But I've made a real commitment to it, and I started lifting about a year ago, which I always wish that I'd done sooner based on the impact that it's had on my body. But in those moments, it's really great thinking time, right? So it's not as though because you're exercising and taking care of yourself, you can't otherwise be thinking about what's important or what's on your plate. It's a great stress relief. And I will never say that I thought that this was possible, but I was playing on the beach with my friends about a year ago. One is a former offensive lineman that I went to college with who actually played for the Saints for a couple of weeks. One's an Ironman winning triathlete. And we were playing a beach game called beach soccer tennis, which we've completely made up, but which is a lot of fun.
I was going to say that can't be a real thing. I've played my fair share of beach sports.
That sounds better than tennis and soccer, though, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Beach soccer, tennis, sounds great. Yeah.
I'll have to find a video of it and send it to you. But anyway, the point is that like after, so I'm playing these two guys on the beach, and I am, as you pointed out, a woman, and I beat them both that day. And that was just something that came with taking care of my body and focusing on exercise. And, that was just pure hard work that does pay off. The other thing that I'd say that I've learned from sports is that mental and physical health are both important, and they're both equally important. And to what I was just saying earlier, that self-care, making time to exercise, that actually has made me better at all of the other things that I otherwise have to do, whether it be work or beating my friends, because I'm obviously competitive in sports on the beach, or anything else. But that it's really important to me, and I look at it differently now, and saying that that 30 minutes that I take to take care of my physical health gives me more energy, reduces my stress levels, and I think overall makes me more resilient, so that I'm better at my job or whatever else it is that I have to do.
I agree completely. I literally walked I was in the gym 5 minutes ago. I had an hour between when I had to get something done and when I could do the podcast. And I went to the gym and ran 2 miles and did like 10 burpees and literally ran up here, and I'm still wet. So what's interesting is, I think with the coolest thing, we've done a lot of podcasts and cool people, but I find this to be probably my favorite one so far. And the reason why is because we're trying to attract really powerful people and send out powerful messages into the world. And from knowing you at a distance for a while, I find you to be incredibly powerful. And what else is interesting is you and I are the same age, but we're the same age, and we're on a board of directors together, and we know each other, and we're doing this podcast together. I grew up in Ohio in a poor family, played football at Ohio State. You grew up in Jersey, go to Harvard, undergrad, Harvard Law School, and yet you and I are teammates here. So there's a lot of questions I want to ask you. I think there is cool. So first one, right out the gate, you said you like pro wrestling. Who was your favorite wrestler as a kid?
It was actually the British Bulldog.
What?
I can't say that I know why, and that it's that obscure will just sort of underscore that I was a huge wrestling fan. But my birthday is in April, and when I was a kid, one of the things that I wanted for my birthday was to get WrestleMania, and it tied up really nicely. But I was a huge fan. They were full of great characters, and they were just wonderful storylines between, in a really sort of simple way for the most part at that time, good guys and bad guys. It was fun to watch.
Well, Megha, I think that SBLA is doing an event in Tampa next Thursday at my office in Tampa, and we have Thaddeus Bullard, who's Titus O'Neil, on the panel. And I think you should fly here and hang out with us and meet Thaddeus and be part of the panel.
That would be awesome. So
you should come over. I mean, honestly, you can work in my office, and we'll set the whole thing up, go get drinks afterward, and you can meet Thaddeus. Just kind of tell us the story of, you go to Harvard, and I think you said you were the editor of the sports newspaper, correct?
Yes. Yeah, I wrote for the sports section in college.
Well, what was the Harvard? I mean, you're in Harvard, and you're surrounded by obviously extraordinarily talented people. What was the sports kind of scene in Boston around Harvard?
So what may surprise people is that actually about 25% of the student body are athletes. And so that's a huge percentage. It's a really deep program. There's everything, obviously, from football to squash to all of the other sports that you have at the collegiate level. One of my favorite things about sports, right, is that it is just a great connector of people. And so one of my favorite events of the year is the Harvard-Yale game. One, because there's a tremendous amount of history there, but two, it's a great opportunity for the entire student body to come together. One of the other sort of great things that I benefited from is that when I was in college, I overlapped for a couple of years with Ryan Fitzpatrick, who is obviously a phenomenally talented quarterback and was able to give Harvard a lot of success. So it was a really fun time to be part of the sports scene at Harvard. The students that are student athletes and the demands that they have on their schedules always impress me, because I didn't have a thing that was a 40-hour commitment every week, but these student athletes do, and they're balancing a lot to be able to perform on the field and then also in the classroom.
Yeah, especially football. I did my first year at Ohio State. I played lacrosse and football, and the difference between the two sports is night and day. In a lot of ways, when I was there, at least, lacrosse was like a hobby that was a serious hobby. It took a lot of time. and football was your entire life. Football was your life, and then you went to school. It was so much. It's just crazy. When you were at Harvard, man, that was an incredible time. I mean, you had Mark Zuckerberg create Facebook. You had Ryan Fitzpatrick as the quarterback. You were there. I mean, that's a pretty cool thing. So let me ask you this. So,
World Series, which was devastating to me at the time, but.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. So someone who's been around sports, you said sports has been a part of your life, your entire life. You're at Harvard. You're surrounded by sports. How did the lessons you learned from sports as a kid and an undergrad help you become an executive, a C-suite person at an NFL football team?
So a couple things. One is that I think one of the things that people love the most about sports, in addition to the community around it, is just that the relationships that you build on the team, right? So it's very important when you're part of that team to learn how to be accountable and responsive to your teammates and to think of the overall goal of the team and not just of yourself. Those are lessons that people should bring with them into the office or the locker room, right? Either place, thinking of the people around you and trying to build relationships with them is really important. The other thing that I'd say is that, you're not going to win every game, right? You're not going to, unless you're me on that one special day, but you're just not going to win every game. Failure is a part of life. And if you're not used to it, I know this is a little bit cliche, but if you're not used to it, you're not creative enough or trying hard enough. And even when you do fail, you beat all the people on the couch that day. And so I think that that's part of it, right? Is that it's important to compete with yourself, do the best that you can do, but expect that you're not going to win every time, and then be able to be resilient and bounce back.
Yeah, I think especially when you get older, like we are now, working out, it allows you to compete with yourself every day. And for me, I like to set something. The hardest thing for me is running. I can't stand running. I hate running. So for me, my victory when I work out normally is completing the run I wanted to complete. And when you wake up at 5 a.m. or whatever it is, and you've already won something going into your day, I think it's a great way to start the day. And also just getting your heart rate up, getting jacked up, getting some kind of release, I think it's the best way to do it. I'll tell you what's cool. So Connor was a captain in the Air Force, and him and I the last year would work out at the military base once in a while. And that was a super motivating thing. When you work out, do you ever work out at the Jaguars facility?
I do, but talk about a place that's intimidating. That's definitely one of them. So what's interesting is that there's we do have the benefit of all of our staff are able to use the facilities on site. So our weight room's open every day as long as our players aren't in there. So we go in early in the morning or late in the evening from 5 to 11, but I could work out here if I wanted to right after.
Something I think is cool about what you just said, especially is you're part of an organization, part of a team that's chasing down a championship. Everyone that pays attention to football knows Shahid Khan is obsessed with winning. He wants to win a championship. He wants to win a Super Bowl. That is clearly his goal. And you being in that building and being a part of it. Now, I think what else is interesting is you are there for the good and the bad. Is in 2017, you guys were a couple plays away from being in the Super Bowl. Literally a couple plays. I mean, you guys were right in there with the Patriots going down to the wire. And if you had one or two more drives, who knows who would have won. Last year, coming off that, very much so the opposite. As someone who was in those buildings for both years, could you feel the difference? Did you notice the difference? To you, as someone who's part of the team in the building every day, what did you notice or feel?
Look, I think that any time that you have expectations that you don't live up to, that's challenging for both everybody in the building and your fans, and you're thoughtful about that. But the record on the field is not an excuse for me to adjust my performance in terms of what my role is. And in fact, in a lot of ways, it's important to me to be just as supportive or even more so when we're not winning, because being positive when you're winning is easy. Being positive when you're not winning is more challenging, and trying to readjust and examine what you're doing. Those are the harder parts. It's part of the game. You're not going to win the Super Bowl every year. You're not going to get to the Super Bowl every year. And so you need to be able to adapt and do your job well, especially when you're in a role like mine, no matter what's going on in the field, and support everyone else who is more closely tied to the wins and losses, because everyone's job is not mine in that sense. But yes, the goal is always to play championship football.
And Megha, you brought up kind of something that was pretty interesting, and I saw this in one of your interviews previously, And, you mentioned that there's always a goal, and the goal is always the championship or to succeed, whether that's the game of football or whether that's life. And, I saw where you had mentioned, one thing that you'd maybe tell yourself when you were 10 years old was, hey, you're going to have plans. You're going to have your path on how to get there, but it might not always work out that way. And so, thinking back about that as well, is that something, how do you continue to have that belief and, set your priorities and set your plan, but with all the full understanding that, the goals may not happen exactly as you are? How do you continue to push, those limits to continue your path?
So the best sort of example of what you just described is that if you had asked me at any point when I was in Manhattan, if I thought that I would be living in Jacksonville, Florida, which I didn't even know exactly where that was, before I moved here, I would have thought that you were crazy. And so I didn't necessarily know what my path was going to be at that point in time, but I did know as I was going through working at the law firm that, look, I think I'm really enjoying the work that I'm doing for our team clients, a little bit more just in terms of the variety that exists as opposed to some of the other clients that we have. I had interviewed for and got declined from any number of jobs at different teams in various leagues. And so I got a lot of no's before I got a lot of yeses. And even when I was in law school, I remember sending out one Thanksgiving, probably something like 100 resumes. And I ended up getting 2 interviews from that entire group. So I think what's important to me is always to have a plan, to focus on the things that I can control, right? So I may not be able to control when and if a team actually has a job opening, but I can put myself in a position to be the person that's thought of and has developed the skill sets that when one of those jobs does open, someone thinks of me. And that's how I ended up here in Jacksonville. And at least for me, and look, people's personalities are obviously different. So people need to think about, I think, what's important to them and what makes them most happy, and sort of adjust based on that or make their plan based on that. But a couple things. One, I always have a plan. I also like to be open to deviating from it. So I want to know what's going on or what my plan is for the day. But if something different happens, I also like to be able to adjust. I just like having the security of a plan. And I feel like it helps hold me accountable, especially if I write things down. The other piece of it is that, just being open to whatever else might come up. I like the variety, right? I like living in the South, even though I've also lived in the Northeast. I like experiencing the new culture and world down here. And that, I think, has opened up my eyes in a way that it wouldn't have had I stayed up north or just continued to be doing the same thing. So it's not something that I expected to be doing, but at the same time, I value and enjoy the sort of diversity of experiences that are coming my way.
Yeah, that's incredible. The more we talk, Megha, the more I see similarity between the two of us. And just for any law students or any people listening to this that are students applying for jobs, you just heard Megha Parekh say one Thanksgiving she sent 100 resumes, got 2 interviews. Well, Megha Parekh also worked at probably one of, if not the premier sports law firm in the country out of law school. I did the same exact thing. One Thanksgiving, I think my 2L year, I was just freaked out about not getting a job after law school. And I sent out hundreds of resumes, got a handful of interviews, ended up at Holland & Knight, which is one of the premier law firms in the country. So it's just about persistence and doing all those things. And, I am a high anxiety person. I know Connor is. I presume you are, based on what you said about writing things down, stuff like that. And I'll tell you what, I know it is tough, but it sure has served me well. And it sounds like it's serving you well too. Now, one thing that's really cool is based on your career path, both as a student and as an attorney at one of the biggest law firms and probably the premier sports law firm, and now with the Jaguars, you've been surrounded by very successful people on the field, off the field, in business, out of business. What is a couple things you've noticed about those people that set them apart from everybody else that has made them so successful?
So there's a few things. And one, not only when I was in college and law school, it was amazing to be surrounded by such intelligent people, also at the law firm. But as you said here too, that's, learning from and the relationships that I have with my coworkers it's one of the most interesting parts of the job, and something that I hope I never start to take for granted. So when you look at the family as a whole, just starting at the top, not only was Mr. Khan, wildly successful in the auto parts business, but he continues to evolve over time. So in 2012, he bought the Jags. In 2013, he bought Fulham Football Club, which is a UK soccer team. And then, amongst other things, in addition to stadium development and a handful of other projects, this last January, the family actually launched a wrestling company called All Elite Wrestling. So they just have such incredible dynamic vision and are not bound by the realities sort of okay, like I know that I already have a football team, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to stop evolving and thinking creatively about what else I might want to grow the business. And then, our team president, Mark Lamping, came from baseball, was also at the new Meadowlands Stadium company, which built MetLife Stadium. But he is one of the best bosses that I've ever had, and that he is not a micromanager. He tells you what the goal is and asks you to accomplish it and empowers you to do that. And so it's been wonderful to learn from him. Our general manager, Dave Caldwell, is one of the best that I've ever seen at building relationships with people, regardless of what level of the organization they're in. And that's everybody from owners to scouts to coordinators that we have here at the team. He makes it a point to go around the building and to be known and to show his face and to talk to people. And that it's wonderful to see people that are so good at what they do, so that you then have the opportunity to hopefully learn from them and adopt some of those awesome behaviors that they have. The one other thing that I'd say is that the mentors and that I've had, sort of, they've always been overall, for the most part, not that they're sort of positive all the time, right? But kindness and cheerfulness are free, right? So the best people that I've worked for, right, they know that being positive and managing their own stress has benefits, impacts everybody else. And I don't work around a bunch of people who are yelling all the time, no matter how stressful it might be. David, you said that we all sort of have anxiety. I think of it as just being organized and trying to manage the chaos, as opposed to necessarily having anxiety, right? So those structures mean that I don't have anxiety. I'm able to manage it better, even though we do have a lot going on.
What I've noticed, Megha, and I think just this last couple of years, I've noticed that there's a certain breed of people who feel they're most relaxed in the most chaos. Mm-hmm. And when you meet people and when you find out that's you, I think you maybe, I don't know if anxiety, whatever you want to call it, but I feel a lot of times in my job, which is a litigator, I do litigation, then I do sponsorship deals. And the sponsorship deals, everything is, I needed this 2 days ago, and we're negotiating these big deals. And then litigation, as you know, is adversarial. And I'll tell you what, I find a lot of times the most relaxed I am is when things are at their peak chaos. So it's, yeah, I don't know. I think that's why it's a fun conversation is you meet people, and that's the point of this podcast, is you bring people together from different backgrounds, you share stories, and you realize that in a lot of ways, we're all the same, going through similar things. Most people want good for others, want to be the best version of themselves. Certain people prioritize things differently and have different goals and aspects, but a lot of us just want the best. And there's something inside certain people that they burn a little bit hotter, wherever that might be. And then you see, when you get older, you see people start separating that way. And that's the stories we're trying to get.
Real quick, and Megha, you mentioned relationships a few times now throughout the podcast, both within the organization and from those that you've learned a lot from. How do you go about establishing meaningful, sincere relationships? And how do you do that in your daily and personal life, but also how have you done that through the growth of your professional career as well?
So it's interesting that you phrase it that way, because I would say that there's in my 20s especially, I worked a lot, and I would say that I'm as guilty as anyone of working maybe too much at times. But I think what I try to do, especially on my personal side, was, even though I wasn't the friend that would answer the phone every day, or the girlfriend that was around every night, what I tried to do is make sure that I was always there for people when they really needed them. The thing that worried me the most was that, look, I don't want to forget what's most important in life. And there's actually a longitudinal study that Harvard had done, and it said the key to happiness, they surveyed men and then ultimately also included their wives in the study over like 75 years. And job didn't matter. People's income levels didn't matter. The number one predictor of their happiness was that they had healthy long-term relationships. So it's as important to me to be a good colleague and coworker and a happy, positive person in a really simple way. I sort of think I want everybody to be happy. And so that's part of work. But, as much as I want to be type A at work and at school, I also want to be a type A friend and daughter and, just a person that other people like being around and they feel better about themselves when they're around me. So I think that to do that, it takes a couple of things. One, you have to be trustworthy. And it's really important to me to do that, to be somebody that other people can trust and feel is supportive of them. One of the things that's been a little bit tougher for me to learn, but that I've sort of found to be true, is that you also have to be a little bit vulnerable at times, right? So be honest, sort of show people, not that I try to not project an image of, David Dietz said something earlier about being powerful. I try to not necessarily project that image, but that, hey, I'm a regular person. Life's not any easier for me. In many ways, I'm very blessed. So it's easier for me in a lot of ways, but I have the same sort of challenges where you talked about getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to work out. I have that aspiration just about every day, but I end up snoozing much later than I intend to. I'm going to have to work out after this podcast. Right. So being honest about who you are and being a little bit vulnerable, I think helps. And then just also being accountable to people and being there when they really do need you. I think that's important. And I am very lucky in that I have people that do that same thing for me.
Well, Meg, I think that, like I said, as someone who's known you for a little while and sees you from afar, I think that you've transcended the need to act powerful, and just who you are is powerful, which is pretty cool. So let's go through, I want to go through a couple of fun questions, and then we'll go back to some more kind of serious stuff, but just some like fun stuff. If Megha Parekh wakes up and doesn't feel well, but she's got to go to the gym, what song motivates you both for in the gym and at work?
That is a great question. So I am in classic Jersey girl fashion, huge Bon Jovi fan.
Nice. Dead or alive.
So yeah, that is one of my favorites. But I also, right now, the thing that I actually wake up to is it's a Brothers Osborne song called "Stay a Little Longer." There's that opening riff is just really, really good. So I play guitar, and probably about 15 years ago now, I got into country music because that's the only place on the radio where I could find guitar solos.
Yeah.
And I grew up loving that with all the hair metal that I was listening to. So that is currently what I'm playing. But I will say that this morning, especially, I woke up and I did hit snooze. It didn't get me out of bed.
I listened to, when I just worked out, I listened to Van Halen Right Now. I hadn't heard it in a while. Totally got me up. I loved it.
Running with the Devil does it for me too.
Oh yeah.
Especially it's got the right cadence if you're
oh yeah, sure.
As long as you're not doing cardio, yeah.
Yeah.
And so Megha, you said you might have hit the snooze this morning. So you're telling me that it's okay when I have some mornings that I hit the snooze as well.
I think so. Look, I think that we talked a little bit about physical and mental health. I will also say that one of the things that I'm guilty of is not prioritizing sleep as often as I should. And I will have a better workout and a better work day if I just sleep a reasonable amount. And my guess is that you two probably fall victim to that as well. But I did read a book. My roommate got it for me because I have insomnia. So I'm up actually pretty often during the middle of the night, from sometimes at least for like an hour between like 2 and 5 a.m. And so my roommate got me this book called The Sleep Revolution. And that really reframed my thinking of it, right? We have this concept of, to be like the best worker, you have to be someone who sleeps 4 or 5 hours a night and put in long hours. And, that's somehow what makes you a success. And it reframed my thinking on it, which is that doesn't, like, the definition of success isn't walking around needing to drink coffee or Diet Mountain Dew Code Reds all day, right? Get some sleep and you'll learn all those other things.
Megha, what do you do? What did you do when you did have insomnia? What did you do for that hour? Because I have insomnia too.
So I actually stopped fighting it. I decided that, you know what, instead of calling it insomnia and thinking that I need to be able to sleep straight through the night because that's what people are supposed to do, I try and get in bed and unwind, which I'm guessing you also struggle with a little bit, but
yeah.
I'll try and get in bed and just read for a little bit, and that usually puts me to sleep. And then when I get back up, if I'm up for about 15 or so minutes, I'll just actually get up and I'll then start reading again, or admit it, like sometimes I just start strolling through Instagram, which is not recommended or good, but I'll stop fighting it. And I stopped treating it as though it was abnormal. and I end up falling asleep in about an hour, and that's fine. As long as I wake up in the morning not too tired because I've gotten enough sleep over the course of the night, that's okay. That's just how I am. I don't need to, it's okay that I don't sleep all the way through the night like some other people do.
Yeah, no, I'm the same way. I probably sleep 3, 4, 5, 6 hours a night most nights, and I haven't had an uninterrupted night. I probably had 10 interrupted nights in the last 6 years, just because my kids get up all the time, and once I'm up with them a little bit, I have a hard time unwinding. But yeah, I'm the same way you are. Is I find if you're up, it's a way to learn something, get more information, listen to podcasts, read books. I used to listen to Coast to Coast AM all the time and just hear crazy stuff. Yeah, no, it's the same way. You know what's interesting, Megha? Have you read the book Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink?
I've heard of it.
So, I mean, it's interesting because what basically you're saying what he says in the book, and he was like a Navy SEAL who he was an elite Navy SEAL and had a disaster in Iraq, and then kind of took the lessons he learned from having basically a disaster in Iraq into leadership and ownership and how to apply it to your life. And what he says is basically, if you want to do something, you need to own it, whatever it is. So if your goal is to become the senior VP of the Jaguars, you need to own that. If your goal is to go to Harvard Law School, you need to own that. And it sounds to me like basically something you've done recently to kind of balance yourself is you've taken extreme ownership of your personal well-being, friendship, stuff like that. So most people apply that to one of two things, their job or working out. But you are taking that and you're applying that extreme ownership mentality to kind of personal things that balance yourself out. So I think it's a really cool thing.
Yeah, David, that brings up a really cool point. Meg, do you think, how recent do you think that you've sort of had maybe that shift, if you may? Because like David, I'm the same way where it's very, very, high anxiety all the time, a million miles an hour in a million different directions. So, and I'm sure you were the same way for a very long time through school and beyond to get to where you were. When did you finally realize that, hey, it's okay to take ownership of just myself as well? And, the other point you brought up was it's okay to, leave the office at a reasonable hour or to, not be having 18 Diet Mountain Dews a day because I used to often think that same way.
Code Red Mountain Dews.
There you go. Yeah. When did you start to, when did that shift happen for you? And did it happen quickly or was it evolved over time?
Two things. One, it's I would admit it's relatively recent, probably within the last 3 years, and in that sense 4 years maybe. In that sense, moving to Jacksonville was a really good thing for my quality of life. So I don't really have breaks on my personality. So if there's things to do, or even if there's nothing to do, I tend to always prefer to be busy. I think that sort of goes back to what David was saying a little bit earlier. So if I'm not working, I fill my time with all sorts of things. But for most of my 20s, I was focused on work, and my goal wasn't necessarily to have a particular job, which is what's interesting. My goal was financial independence. So my parents are the most wonderful people in the world. They're unbelievably hardworking. They immigrated here from India. We grew up always with enough, but never with a lot. And my goal was really just to get to the point where I wasn't relying on them for anything anymore so that they could retire and stop working so hard and travel the world. And they're doing that. So I did, after graduating law school, finally have money in my pocket. Although when I graduated, there was about only $20 in my bank account.
Yep.
I went home and lived with my parents for a summer instead of going on a bar trip. But once I started working and was able to support myself, that was ultimately the goal for my 20s. And I don't know that I really realized it in that way up until I was through a lot of it. But once I was through a lot of it and my brother and I are able to take care of them and buy stuff for them now, it's just the best feeling in the world. So once that was sort of complete, was one of the big triggers. The other was leaving Manhattan. So New York City, people work hard, and there's a lot of people who love that environment and thrive in it. For me, it meant that I was just working and not taking care of myself quite as much as I should. So moved down here. Quality of life is a little bit more balanced in terms of work and being outside. The weather's phenomenal, so you can play outside 11 months out of the year. There's just a lot to do outside, right? So I can go drag my paddleboard out to the ocean. And last Sunday, before I went to London, woke up in the morning, went paddleboarding, went home, packed, and then flew across the ocean for work. But that's not something that would have been quite as easy to do in New York. And I get all the reasons why people love New York City, and there's a lot of things that I love about it. But being down here, being able to get in my car and drive to Charleston or Savannah or Orlando or St. Augustine, all those things sort of suit my personality a little better. So it was an evolution when I was down here. I also, when you're at the law firm, you sort of manage people with associates, but it's different in that sense. Now I have a team that works for me, and I also want to I want them to have a quality of life. And I think that's hard to do if you have a boss who's at the office and working all the time. And that's really important to me, that they sort of know that I value balance for them and I want them to have that in their lives. So that means that I need to model it for them.
Well, that's really cool. I mean, like you said, taking ownership of all those things. It's really cool. Mm-hmm. So similar question. So what movie motivates Megha Parekh in the gym and at work?
Oh man, this is so embarrassing because the truth is it's The Karate Kid. I love that movie.
It's not embarrassing. That's a great movie.
Might be a little embarrassing.
I don't think it's embarrassing.
I love it. What scene particularly, Megha?
I don't know if it's because I had Asian parents that like Mr. Miyagi's methods just resonated with me, but he was such like a scrawny little kid who, through that relationship, which is the most unlikely friendship, right, ends up being able to take Johnny down in the championship. It's a really good feel-good underdog story, and I like that.
All right, so I know that you're a big reader. What books do you suggest the younger versions of David Lisko and Megha Parekh read to become better people, have that balance you're talking about? Or what books do you recommend younger people read?
So I'm going to answer this question in two parts. One, I'm one of the few people that I know that still really value reading literature. So I think people should read fiction and nonfiction. I try to alternate between the two.
I agree.
Great literature reminds you and teaches you just as much as a good book on management will, because it forces you to think about things in a different way, or maybe remind you of experiences that you haven't thought about in a while. And so I think people should read as much as they possibly can. The last two books that I finished, this is not related to anything purely work related, but nonfiction was actually Cosmos by Carl Sagan. One of the best books I've ever read. Truly covers the whole breadth of the universe, the stars, radio waves, everything from Newton to modern day space travel. And it's a book that everyone should read because it gives you a better understanding of your place in the universe and, an understanding of the universe around you, which I thought was really interesting. My favorite book that I've read on time management, even though I don't take everything I'm not as devoted of a follower as I know that he's gotten, not for any reason other than time, but the 4-Hour Workweek I thought had some really practical tips about taking advantage of your own time. That's by Tim Ferriss. Yeah. And there's a few things from that book that I've taken. One is that I actually do use my Outlook calendar to block times of the day just purely to work, so that I don't end up running from meeting to meeting to meeting and then end up having to do a night shift where I'm actually drafting contracts. I really thought that was helpful. The other thing that I thought was helpful that book taught was, no is a complete sentence. You don't need to say yes to everything. And I think a lot of times people, especially people in professional services, feel like if they're saying no, they're somehow not serving their clients or failing in some way or being selfish for that matter. And one of the things that reframed for me was that, saying no actually just may mean that someone else is being selfish and asking you to do something you don't really want to do. So just be really thoughtful about your time, right? It's the one really finite resource that you have. And then my favorite book of all time, which I reread once every probably 5 or so years, is actually East of Eden by John Steinbeck. That book and the way that Carl Sagan covers everything in space, that book by John Steinbeck seems to me to cover all aspects of the human condition with the characters that are in it. So that's one of my favorites to read.
That's very cool.
That's great. Real quick, going back to the time management and the 40-hour. So you mentioned some things that really resonate with myself. Is the no is a complete sentence. That was something that I certainly have struggled with, and just actually recently have kind of learned to counteract that, if you may, or understand that no is a complete sentence. And was there a situation in your life, or was it really just after you read that, you kind of just started to actually apply that to your life? Because, where I was coming from, it was, I just feel that, I'm so ambitious that I never want to be limited to not do something. And so, if someone was asking me to be a part of something or do it, it was like, oh, of course, like I'll make it work, because that will only grow my network and my contacts. And, we're doing something positive in a million different ways. So that's how I thought about it. But then slowly, through conversations with, those like David, and then hearing it now from yourself and reading it, and, it really is, your bandwidth is only so much. And to be 100 miles an hour in the right direction, you have to be pointed in a very focused direction. Was there a moment that stuck out to you where you're like, okay, no is no, and I'm blocking out 1 to 3 every day of my calendar to work? Or did that sort of, was that an evolution as well?
It's definitely an evolution, and I will say that it's also something that I still struggle with every day, because very much like you, as soon as someone asks me to do something, I think, I'm interested in it because I'm sort of intellectually curious about everything, and I want to help everybody that comes to me asking for something. So the moment sort of for me was a friend of mine pointed out, and that's the other thing that I would say, is that everyone should surround themselves with friends that are brutally honest with them, because you don't always like what you hear, but it's good feedback. So I think I was struggling to juggle some competing priorities, and a friend of mine said, look, every minute that you spend doing something that you don't really want to be doing is a minute away from the people that you actually care about and that want to spend time with you. It's like, time's your most scarce resource. I don't want anything from you. He's like, the other people that care about you don't want anything from you. We actually just want to spend time with you. And I was the friend, and look, they're really understanding about it, but I'm the friend who'll whip out a laptop at a bar to go knock out a credit agreement and send it out, or end up on a work call at something family related. And he said, the way that we all know that you care about us is if you're actually spending your time with us. And that was really powerful feedback from him. Yeah. The other thing that I'd say is, like, you're not going to do anything particularly well if you're stretched in a bunch of different directions. And so someone said to me, look, he's like, I know that a lot of people reach out to you saying that they just want to meet. Figure out if this is someone that you can mentor, or if it's someone that can mentor you. And if it's not one of those two things, then just tell them that you can't, and until a later time when one of those two things is true. It's like, but that's who you should spend all of your time with, someone that you can help and mentor, or someone that's going to do that for you.
That's a great piece of advice.
No, I think I fell into that the last year, which is I only have time for two things, family and work. And I consider my close friends to be part of my family. So I literally have time for those two things. And if it's not one of those two things, I simply can't do it. And I get approached a lot to represent guys that are trying to get into the NFL. And I hate saying no, because I feel like I was once a person who felt like Rocky Balboa, and I wish someone would take an interest in me, and I wish someone would help me. And I got into being an agent originally because I wanted to help people that were on the periphery, but I just can't do it anymore because I just can't. I can't be the person I want to be and be the person I want to be to people that I need, that I want to be there for, family and professionally, and take on that burden. And like the ownership thing, you can't, someone like you or me or Connor, I can't halfway take on the burden. If I take on the burden, I'm going to own it. And if I own it, I'm going to fight and work and work and work. And if out the gate, I don't see that ever actually happening, then the answer's got to be no. So back to reading, I have absolutely no scientific proof of this whatsoever, but I swear reading books just makes you more intelligent. Like, you can go to school all you want, but if you want to get more intelligent, just reading books will make you more intelligent. The last two books I read, which you should read both of them if you haven't already, is Ready Player One, is phenomenal. And it's all based on the 80s, which I think you have an affinity for that. And then I read Killer Angels, which is about the Battle of Gettysburg and the Civil War. And both of them were phenomenal. The Killer Angels book, I mean, talk about talent. The guy writes the book, and you pick up the book, and it's intimidating because of the Civil War. It's Battle of Gettysburg, and you read the book within 2 or 3 pages. You feel like you are in the camps of these soldiers. It's absolutely phenomenal. Connor, last 2 books you read.
The last two books I read. So I'm a huge Columbus, Ohio guy.
Ready Player One takes place in Columbus.
Does it really?
Yeah, because they say the future, which is actually coming true in reality, is the future of society. Everyone lives in Columbus, Ohio. It's the biggest city in the world because they don't live in the real world. They live in a virtual world. So it's the best place to live because the tech companies live there. And Fortnite is like putting their main headquarters in Columbus. And all these people are moving to Columbus to live closer to the servers so they can be closer to the Fortnite servers for some kind of advantage.
Some kind of competitive advantage.
Yeah, supposedly, yeah.
Which another really quick, not tangent, is I just learned that parents are paying Fortnite tutors for their children. They're literally paying tutors to come in and teach their kids to have an added advantage in Fortnite, which is absurd. But anyway, so I'm reading a book right now, which I have no business knowing anything to do in the restaurant industry or how that works. However, it's Cameron Mitchell's autobiography. And so the title in itself, I think, is very cool. The title is Yes is the Answer, What's the Question?
Yeah, Meg, I don't know if you know who Cameron Mitchell is, but in Columbus, he owns like the 10 or 12 best restaurants in Columbus. And he owns a bunch of restaurants in Florida now. He owns, I think, the Ocean Prime. Yeah, he owns a bunch of really high-end restaurants. Yeah.
All over the place.
But massive success in the food industry.
Yeah, massive success. And it's just, it's a true, being from Columbus, everyone knows his name. It's pretty powerful. And so it's a true rags to riches story. This guy went from, Megha talking about, maybe have a goal but not knowing how to get there. It's kind of exactly what he did. He came from nothing. His father, being out of his life at a very, very young age, really went to school, school had nothing, graduated with nothing, and somehow just followed his passion, which really led to his vision. And then his vision led to, the execution of his dream. And, he had goals and he had milestones and he didn't always know how to get there, but he did. And, that's slowly how he built his empire. So really neat story, but I just love the title in itself. Yes is the answer. What's the question? Because
So my wife worked for Cameron Mitchell in undergrad.
Yep.
And they serve Coke products at Cameron's restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
If a customer asked for Pepsi, they were told to walk to Taco Bell and get them Pepsi and serve them Pepsi in their restaurants. Pretty incredible.
It's insane. Well, in the story behind it, the whole thing is the chocolate milkshake. Anyone who gets hired there, they give them a chocolate milkshake because he went to a restaurant one time and his little nephew, I believe his nephew at this point, ordered a chocolate milkshake. And long story short, the answer was no. And, in a roundabout way, he got the manager involved. And, he said, look, do you guys have milk? Do you have ice cream? Do you have chocolate? And then, he's like, can I get all three of those mixed together, blah, blah, blah. And voila, it's a chocolate milkshake. And just to prove his point that customer service and service always comes first. And if you do that, and even to your point, Megha, if you build a culture of relationship focused, and something where you really value who you work with, you can do something pretty incredible. I love that book.
You know what's funny about the milkshake thing is McDonald's. So I get McDonald's a lot because not once a week we get McDonald's for my kids. My kids love McDonald's. So once a week we get McDonald's, and McDonald's doesn't have chocolate soft serve. They only have vanilla soft serve. But my older son Henry will only eat chocolate. So I have to convince these people every week. Listen, if you put vanilla soft serve into a Frosty cup, and then you put chocolate syrup in, and then you hit the Frosty button, it'll make chocolate ice cream.
It's done.
So every week I've explained that to them, but every week they end up doing it for me. But I have to pay for like two things. Like I have to pay for a Frosty and something else or something like that, but it's worth it.
The point matter being.
Second book.
So second book wasn't the last one I read, but it's actually one that you gave me, David. I loved it. It was Ugly Americans. It's kind of an older one, flashback, but I love that story. Just based upon these guys went out, took on a market and an industry that they really had no business being in, nor even understanding it. And they figured it out.
She might know this guy.
I was going to say, yeah.
Megha,
have you heard of the book Ugly Americans?
Do you know who Ben Mesrick is, Megha?
No.
Okay, so you don't know. Okay, so Ben Mesrick wrote the Facebook book, and he wrote a book called Bringing Down the House, which is the MIT poker team that took down Vegas. He is from Boston, lives in supposedly the mall, I guess. Weird guy, but an absolutely incredible author. if you ever want like a book to inspire you to go to do a business deal in London, pick up one of his books. And he basically tells stories of young people that just hit it big, like Zuckerberg and like this, like I said, the MIT poker team. Or he wrote a book called Straight Flush about these college guys that ended up owning the third biggest party poker company in the world at one point, and how they created the company and then what the company did and basically how it came down. So he's from Boston, and he I think he went to Harvard. An incredible author named Ben Mesrick. You should check him out. I mean, like I said, Bringing Down the House is one of my favorite books of all time. The Facebook book, which is called Social Network, I think, is phenomenal too. So I had to ask you this question because, when I met my wife, crazy enough, I met my wife on Facebook. We had a poli-sci class together, and she saw me there and poked me on Facebook. I poked her back. We went on our first date. So you were there when he was there. So did you ever meet Zuckerberg? Did you know Zuckerberg when you were at Harvard?
I did not know him. My roommate, interestingly enough, did a paper on, right when Facebook came out, did a paper on the sociology of it for her class. And then he left shortly thereafter. But what was most sort of jarring to me is that she made my first profile on it. And up until probably like 2010, I just hadn't focused on it. But like my personal cell number was still on there.
Wow.
David, it was sort of like you described, right? Like we used it to share study guides and class notes and things like that. And it's incredible what it's transformed into today, for better or worse. It helps propel things like the Arab Spring, but it also perpetuates negative information that wants to repeat itself.
No, when I first heard about Facebook, I mean, Ohio State was one of the early. I think Ohio State was one of the first big schools to get it. I mean, I know Harvard obviously was the first school, then it went Ivy League. I think Ohio State might have been the first really big school to get it. And I remember getting early on, and I remember on the football team, if you had Facebook, you got massive shit. You got made fun of, harassed, like, oh, he's on Facebook. Like, and then of course, everyone in the world's on Facebook now. And then when we first did it, it was just fun. I mean, back then, Instant Messenger was what everyone had, which I don't understand, because Instant Messenger, at least from what I understand, is a better version of Twitter. You just had conversations with people and stuff like that. So you had Instant Messenger, and then Facebook came around and you created a profile. And I really thought, like the movies, I thought it was basically for dating and just for friends. And I mean, when I first got on, I never in a million years would have guessed that grandmother. I mean, the cool thing about Facebook to me now is that my grandparents in Ohio get to see my kids being raised and grow up on Facebook in a lot of ways. But I mean, there's also massive negativity to it and different things. But yeah, it's incredible. What was it like being at Harvard what about the Winklevoss twins? Did you know the Winklevoss twins?
I did not know them, but obviously we knew of the dispute.
Yeah, so Megha, I would love to get your take real quick, and this is kind of really off tangent, but it's David and I, a lot of the people that we talk with in terms of, a lot of the conversations go around towards leadership, and for some reason or another, it goes back towards, today's youth and how they're growing up, and they're kind of growing up in a society different than how we all did, which really is social media driven. Just really your take on it all. Is there any advice, like even for, young professionals and even younger that are kind of growing up in this society? What's your take with the social media that's out there, the presence, how to navigate it and, use it for a force of, positivity versus negativity?
You mentioned how different it is. And I would say that even just given the age that we're at, it's a lot. So I didn't get my first iPhone until like 2011. So my texting capabilities were limited to like pushing like each digit 3 times. And it was just a different, it's a much different mindset. I think that there's a couple of things that are different. One, people are really struggling. And this, I think, actually transcends ages. People that are on their phones are really, really struggling with, I think, being present and having an attention and being able to concentrate. So myself included, I've really had to start at the office and at home, just putting my phone down for significant periods of time. And I found that I feel so much better. And I'm not missing, I haven't missed anything. There's been no emergency that's come up. But, if I used to take my phone with me when I went to the beach, I used to take my phone with me when I was or check my email constantly while I was sitting at work. Now I'll put my phone down for an hour and play guitar, or put my phone down and go on a beach walk. And the world hasn't imploded without me checking my email for an hour. And it's, it was just sort of narcissistic to think that somehow someone's going to need to get a hold of me that quickly. The other thing that I value is that I think there's a little bit different just in terms of how specifically young people think of it today is like, I sort of value privacy, like in the sense that I don't think that I'm doing anything wrong all the time, but I don't need the world to know what I'm doing all the time either. It's like when I'm sitting at home listening to Bon Jovi watching The Karate Kid, like tell the world that those things are happening. And so I only say that to say that maybe it's not so much privacy, but it's that, this is something that I absolutely would have said to myself when I was a kid. Don't look to the left and right and worry about what other people are doing. Focus on what it is that you want to do and what you think you enjoy the most. And I worry a little bit that social media sometimes creates an unhealthy competition or an unhealthy version of comparison. So I for instance, I've had an eating disorder since I was 12, very much under control, and like not I'm at like a healthy weight, and exercising helps a lot with that. But I can only imagine what it would be like to be then a 12-year-old girl today, seeing the images that you see, when at that time, it was maybe a little bit of, the internet was just starting. So like the worst was sort of magazines as you're walking out the grocery store aisle. Today, you could be inundated with thousands and thousands of those photos. Some are photoshopped, some aren't. But, that I think would be just a really challenging thing for your self-image.
Yeah.
And then as you're creating profiles, I think that, it's easy to be the best version of yourself in some ways on social media. But what's always most impressive to me is people that sort of have the courage to be imperfect and to accept the imperfections of others, right? That knowing that world, you're able to construct the narrative that you want to construct. But, I want my narrative to be just as much about the ways that I screw up or the days that are hard as it is about the things that I may do well.
Yeah. And you mentioned, you mentioned just hearing that right there. And I think, I'm going to kind of go on a limb and say, going back to even what you said in terms of vulnerability, Dr. Brene Brown, she has a TED Talk on this that's incredibly powerful, just about the power of vulnerability from a leadership standpoint. Would you say that is one of maybe your kind of key characteristics as a leader, either directly or indirectly, is to be vulnerable and share that vulnerability?
I would say that it's feedback that I got as something that I should work on. So I actually would say that more often than not, I enjoy being sort of the toughest, most level-headed person in the room, because I want to be a support to everybody, especially in times of crisis. What I've had to evolve to do is learn to be more vulnerable at times and to a level that I'm comfortable with, because as we talked about earlier, I think that that's how people build relationships and trust, right? You can trust someone who's transparent with you. It's tough to trust people who seem like they have it all together and not a single vice or guilty pleasure in the world, because then they don't seem as
they're fake human people and you're a real person. Yeah. Real versus fake person. You can't trust a fake person. So I think you're right completely. I actually listened to a Joe Rogan podcast. There's a guy on Joe Rogan like last week, I think, or something like that. And what he was saying was that it was human nature that if two farmers, this was hundreds of years of ancestral DNA, and if two farmers had two fields next to each other and one farmer was struggling, they saw the farmer next to them doing extremely well in their crops, then internally they said, okay, well, I'm doing something wrong. I look at that person, I'm jealous. I can do better by doing what they're doing and increase my yield. And that was somewhat healthy. The problem now is via social media, we are seeing people all over the world, and the comparison is totally unrealistic because people aren't the true version of themselves on social media, and you're comparing yourself to people that are in completely different situations. I'll tell you what, though, in a lot of ways, social media is who you are. I've been on trial teams where we're getting to select a jury, and we create profiles for every potential juror. And I'll tell you what, the most important information a lot of times we put into those profiles are, what are they saying on social media? What are they liking? Who are they following? What do they do? And we think we can get a pretty close idea of who this person is, what their tendencies are, what their personality is based on their social media. And I mean, and we're relying on that in our biggest trials. So, and it's wild stuff. Yeah. So Megha, last fun question, and then we'll kind of get to a couple more serious things just for the benefit of the listeners. Now, I think you, Connor, and I are all very successful people, but also have at a younger age focused heavily on being successful and pushing ourselves to perfection in a lot of ways. So I'll go and tell you guys, I've never said this before on the podcast, but of what one of my craziest stories is about achieving and wanting to be successful. And then I want to hear what you guys have to say. When I was in high school, and this is insane, but when I was in high school, every year on New Year's Eve, I would do push-ups when the ball dropped because I wanted to be working towards my goals while other people were partying, drinking, whatever they were doing. And I look back now and think I was literally insane. So what are any funny or fun stories that you did when you were really, really chasing success that you look back on now and think that was just batshit crazy?
Yeah, Megha, go ahead.
Oh, Connor, it's going to take me a second to think of one. I don't know that I have that level of insanity in me to be doing push-ups at 11:59 on New Year's
Now
Eve.
I feel even worse. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely wasn't doing push-ups on New Year's, so I can say that. But I did just, I would, like David, football was my life. I wore ankle weights to school.
That's crazy.
On a daily basis.
That's crazy. You guys are making that's crazy.
I would wear ankle weights to school, and I would not really care what anyone thought.
Did you ever have this?
I thought walking from science to algebra and ankle weights was going to lower my 40.
That's awesome. Did you ever have those crazy like George Costanza shoes with like the base on the front? You could jump higher supposedly.
I didn't have those. No.
All right, Megha, do you have a mild crazy story for us?
Yeah, so I didn't sleep for an entire weekend when one of my college roommates came to New York. So we were working on something, and I didn't want to miss any time with her because she was visiting. And so I would get up at 7 o'clock in the morning, went to work, spent pretty late into the night with her, slept a couple hours, and then did it again. And I probably have that story for more weekends than I should admit.
That's probably top 5.
Yeah.
I don't know how I made it, but I never, especially when it was people that I really cared about. Like I just didn't want to miss out on it, but I also knew that I had to get work done. So, I mean, I've worked from bars, I've worked from hospital rooms when my nephew was being born.
Wow.
I've worked from the rodeo in Madison Square Garden at times. So
that's awesome.
You know what I found though? Being prepared and trying to do the things is always better than just sitting at the office instead. So it may suck that you're answering a phone call from the pool at the hotel in Turks and Caicos that you're at, but it's always better doing that than it is sitting in the office and missing out on that experience.
Heck yeah, you're living your life to the fullest. I've told Connor this before on a podcast. So the push-up thing truly is like nuts, but I'm telling you, I was like, when I was younger, I was just in this like feast or famine type situation. I felt like where I had to push so hard to like overcome and achieve the goals I want to achieve. I just was psychotic, I guess. But I have a much better balance now, I think.
Yep.
But I take phone calls everywhere. I've taken phone calls in a castle in Scotland, on a beach in Hawaii, on a boat to go out to a shark cage. I take phone calls everywhere. So yeah, and like you said, it's a hell of a lot better to be taking a phone call on a beach in Hawaii than it is in an office. So yeah, you're maximizing your time. So back to kind of a more serious question. One of the reasons why actually we even started this podcast begin with is you and I had a conversation 2 years ago, and we talked very briefly about interviews and a podcast and a blog. And you said something to me, which was, I get asked to do informational interviews all the time. And if I could do a podcast or something like that and kind of tell my story a little bit, maybe people could listen to that and get the message. So what is, if someone's in law school or an undergrad and they say, I want to work in sports, I want to be a sports lawyer, what is your best advice for those people?
I think that it's a couple things. One, think about the different ways in which you can work in sports. So there are 32 of my job, and that's just not a lot, right? That's getting this job in a lot of ways requires a lot more luck and a lot more chance than getting into Harvard does. So think about the different ways that you can work in sports and what's important to you. So do you like the idea of working at a league, at a team, at a sports property? But I think if you expand your horizons in terms of what that could be, right, that is helpful because it'll give you a job that you're probably more passionate about, if especially if you're informed on it. But two, it gives you more opportunities, right? So everybody that I know that's in a job in sports says, well, you'll never believe it, but it was this really unique set of circumstances. So for me, I obviously ended up picking a law firm with sports, a sports practice there, but I graduated in the middle of recession. And so for the first 18 months, there was no M&A activity, let alone buying and selling of sports teams. And during that first 18 months, I worked on a little bit of everything. That gave me a hugely broad skill set that is helpful today because at the football team, we work on more than sports, right? So I do work with my counterpart over at Fulham on soccer related matters. We expand internationally. The family does majority minority investments in joint ventures all the time, whether it be in real estate or other things. Our owner's son has a sports analytics company. We just launched professional wrestling. Had I not taken those 18 months to learn about a little bit of everything on the transactional side, I would not be as helpful to them as I'm able to be right now, right? So focusing on sports is a good thing, but understand the breadth of what that actually involves. And for me, in any given day, it could be as much real estate as it is, what people think about in terms of sponsorships or player contracts. The other thing that I would say is that you have to get used to the fact that no is an answer, that you're going to hear a lot just because it is limited in terms of how many people are trying to get in. And so one of the things that students ask is, what can I do to get myself noticed or stand out? Like every good lawyer or professional, when I don't know the answer to a question, one of the things that I do is Google it. And so, kids today have a platform that we didn't have where you can publish nearly anything on the internet and become an expert, an authority, or at least have an informed opinion on something. And it's one data point. It's not the only data point, but a student that is able to say, hey, I researched this particular matter that might be of interest to you. So here's what I think the evolution of sports betting is going to be. That's a much more interesting conversation to me than someone just saying, hey, I'm interested in sports. What advice do you have? Because, that's a conversation where that other person's also establishing that they're an authority or have a really strong interest in something.
Yeah. That's one thing we have in common also is I'll never forget. I mean, we went to law school at the same time too. You and I did. And I'll never forget when the stock market crashed and there was panic in my law school. I mean, absolute panic of a lot of people had jobs lined up that got canceled. Luckily, I was a first year law student, so there was a buffer, but man, I'll never forget. I felt so bad for the people that had their job canceled. And I actually ended up working for the Columbus Blue Jackets for free all through law school because there were not paid jobs. It was a different time than it is now. So I absolutely love working in a big law firm. You worked at a really big law firm too. Do you recommend that people that want to work in sports or have a job like you have, you recommend, I think you just basically did a little bit, but do you recommend that people work for a big law firm if they have the opportunity to do so?
So look, I don't think that there's any one set path for anyone. I will say that for me, here's what I learned while working there. We had a public-private M&A deal that was international, and there were some 40 different people on the deal team. Having to coordinate that, and it was about an 18-month-long deal because it went through antitrust review, it went through securities litigation. Having to coordinate that was one of the most challenging things that I've ever done professionally. That taught me a lot in terms of not only just how to manage people at work, but also how to do any number of different things from a legal perspective. And so there was a breadth of training and the quality of training that made me really, I think, exposed to a number of different areas of the law and also really resilient, right? So when you work in that intense of an environment, you get out and you're able to, I think, better handle things that may seem stressful to others just because you get good at it in the way that you would at anything that you were practicing. So I appreciated the complexity of the work and also the intensity of the work at times because that I think has helped me overall later in my career. That said, I do believe firmly that there is many ways to get to where you're going to be and many ways to educate yourself and get those experiences. Those are just the things that I pulled from it, in addition to having a network of really smart colleagues all around you that you can ask questions to, which I thought was valuable.
Okay. If you could tell anything to the high school version of yourself, any one thing, what would that one thing be?
that it's okay to assert the right to be complex. So one of the things that I would say that I've struggled with my whole life is that, and not really struggled with too much, but that feedback that I've gotten is that, hey, like, you are a little girl who's the child of Indian immigrants who have somewhat conservative, although not really, sort of ideas about what the genders ought to be doing. But it turns out that you like not only curling your hair, but helping your dad with projects around the house and playing sports with your brother and running around with him. And you want to play the drums and the guitar. And those aren't things that little girls typically do. Certainly ordering WrestleMania wasn't. But that it's okay, right? It's okay that I don't fall into any one particular stereotype or area of interest, in the same way that it's okay that there's times when I do want to wear dresses and curl my hair, and those things don't somehow undermine, my other interests. And it's okay to sort of it's okay to be whomever it is that you want to be and what makes you happy, as opposed to worrying so much about, one, what other people think, or two, whether or not you're living up to their expectations of what they expect of you based on all of these other pieces of your identity that may or may not determine what your own interests are. So I was as interested in doing traditional Indian dance, which my mom really valued and enjoyed when I did it, as I was in, banging on the drums to Metallica. And it's okay.
You are awesome. Jeez, oh man, you sound awesome to me. All right. So last question from me, to any person who is listening to this podcast that has either given up hope on themselves or is struggling with self-confidence, what do you say to them about becoming a confident person and being the best version of yourself?
I think two things. One, confidence comes with expertise. So whatever it is that you're good at and makes you feel like you are succeeding in, and I think that sometimes people will say, well, there's nothing that I feel that I'm good at. That's okay. You can still try things, and turns out that may not be your thing. But I think trying them is what matters, because when you find something that you're good at, you will feel confident. I was listening to a podcast a week or so ago, and I tend to do this whenever I'm walking around the beach. But so one of the podcasts said that, this person just tries something new for 1 month at a time. And he may completely abandon it at the end of the month and say, you know what, I wasn't very good at that and I failed every day. But at least he's willing to try those things that he hasn't tried before. And then the other thing that I'll say is, look, get comfortable with rejection and take it for the moment that it is, right? It's okay to be sad sometimes. It's okay to be down on yourself sometimes. It just means that you shouldn't don't take that for anything more than it is, which is that everyone's got low moments in their lives, and that will pass, right? And the thing that will help it pass, hopefully, is whatever makes it feel so that you have motivation back again. So whether that's, I snooze every morning when I attempt to work out, and then instead sleep through it and then have to go home and do it after work. But Saturday mornings when I'm getting up to go volunteer with Habitat for Humanity, I have somehow no problem getting up out of bed. And it's just you have to figure out what will motivate you. And that's such a wonderful thing. So 7:00 on Saturday, I'm able to jump out, even if I ended up going out on Friday night. But Tuesday mornings are somehow tougher, just because it's a different sort of motivation when you're going to go do something like that versus coming to the office. And so it may be work, but it may be something else in your life that makes you happy and motivates you, and go find those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions, Connor?
Megha, I think every single person that's been listening to this, no matter what age they are going to be very inspired. And we can't thank you enough for sharing your story, but also just everything else, where you are today and how you've gotten there.
Yeah, Megha, I'll tell you right now. I mean, I think I'm a judgmental person, and I that's one of the things I don't do well is I end up judging people. But sitting here and, like I said, knowing you like I do, I think you are an extraordinarily incredible person. I mean, just absolutely incredible in every way. And I think that you are the kind of person that everyone, I have 3 kids. You are the kind of person that everyone hopes their kids become. And it really is an inspiration. And I hope that anyone that needs to listens to this podcast and understands that Megha Parekh was the person in high school that she just described to you. And now she is doing international sports deals at the highest level. And it's incredible. So thank you so much, Megha. Ticket Podcast, Sports Business Leadership Association. Donate, get involved, shop, do it all. And that's it.
Thank you both very much for the time. I appreciate it. And look, Dave, that's very kind what you said, but you have kids like me when you have parents and neighbors and coaches and mentors that have helped me throughout the way. So I would be remiss in taking credit for all that.
All right, cool.
Thank you, Megha.
Thanks, Megha.
Thank you both.
All right, bye.
And that's today's ticket. Remember, where you're at today is not going to be where you end up. We hope podcasts like this help you find your ticket to health, wealth, and happiness. If you like what you heard, punch your ticket with our team and follow us at Ticket Productions. Until next time, get up, get moving, and make a positive impact on today.